What if the car you love becomes the weapon you use to destroy your life? Morning sunlight streams through the tall glass windows of the Parkwell Elite Auto Lounge, reflecting off rows of gleaming, multi-million-dollar machines. Among them is a deep red supercar, a car so rare that even a glimpse feels like a privilege. Sweat glistens on the brow of Marcus Cole, 30, a quiet janitor with strong hands, tired eyes, and a soul shaped by a lifetime of deferred dreams. He's always loved cars, not for the money, not for the status, but for the poetic sound of the engine, the elegance of the curve of the fenders. Today, as he silently mops the polished floor, the supercar catches his eye and holds it. It's not just a car, it's a masterpiece. Unable to resist, he paused, running his fingers lightly over the smooth surface. "Are you crazy?" a voice said behind him. It was Victoria Langley, a 42-year-old executive, sharp-tongued, blonde, immaculately dressed, and as cold as ever. Her face was twisted in disgust. "How dare someone like you touch a billionaire's car?" she hissed. Before Marcus could defend himself, another voice cut in, low, authoritative, and dangerous. "You think you deserve to touch my stuff?" It was Daniel Prescott, 45, the white billionaire who owned the supercar, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit, shoes that gleam like mirrors, eyes colder than steel. Victoria's voice cut in again, full of malice. "This car costs more than you've ever earned in your entire life. You don't belong here." Marcus tried to speak. "Please, I meant no harm. I love cars. I didn't even leave a stain." But Daniel had made his decision. "I don't want to see this man again, ever. Fire him." Panic welled up in Marcus like ice. "I need this job. My wife is pregnant. Please." "Get out," Victoria spat. "Now." That morning, Marcus walked out with his dreams crushed underfoot. By the next day, the supercar was missing. And when the police came knocking, all fingers pointed to the man who loved the car the most, the janitor, who now had nowhere to run. And so the hunt began. Marcus Cole didn't even know he was being pursued. While the city buzzed with headlines, Marcus's picture flashing across every television screen and gas station kiosk wanted, "John's a stolen supercar from billionaire CEO." He sat in his quiet one-bedroom apartment, scrolling through job listings on his cracked phone. The strong hands that once cleaned the luxurious floors shook as he tapped out each desperate application. His wife, Clara, 7 months pregnant, returned home from her third night shift at the diner. Her uniform smelled of grease and bleach. She looked exhausted, but her eyes widened with fear as she walked through the door. "Marcus," she whispered, gasping for breath, "we have to go, now." He stood up, confused. "What's going on?" She shoved the phone into his hand, a constant stream of news, his face, his name, the missing supercar, the bounty, $100 million, 0 cents. Marcus felt the ground fall away from him. "I didn't steal anything," he muttered, barely audible. "I know," Clara said, tears welling up in her eyes, "but the world doesn't care. You're black. They've made up their minds." He stiffened. The simple sentence carried the weight of centuries. They packed quickly, just the essentials, diapers, sonograms, an old Bible from his grandmother. Then, as sirens wailed in the distance, Marcus disappeared down the fire escape and into the darkness. For 3 nights he slept in the back seat of his old Chevy Malibu, parked behind an abandoned gas station. The city he had once quietly cleaned up now watched him with suspicion in its shadows. One of those nights, half asleep and sore, a thought seized him. This wasn't a coincidence. Victoria had hated him from the start, not for his performance, not for anything he'd done, but for what he couldn't change. His skin. He remembered how startled she'd been when he passed her in the hallway. She'd insisted on disinfecting anything he touched. She'd never called him by name, just janitor. But it wasn't until he'd heard 2 mechanics talking in a late-night diner, not knowing he was sitting 3 booths away, that the final piece of the puzzle fell into place. "She paid cash to move the car," one of them whispered. "Straight to the docks." Well, Marcus's heart nearly stopped. The docks. He waited until morning, then walked there. Hiding behind a shipping container, he watched Victoria Langley drive up in a black SUV. She wasn't alone. A large man in overalls was with her. Together they rolled up the container's doors. Here he was. The super. Marcus felt rage and hurt well up in his chest. They had used his love for that car to destroy him. But he didn't get angry. Not yet. Instead, with trembling fingers, he pulled out his phone and did something unexpected. He called Daniel Prescott. When the billionaire answered, Marcus said calmly, "I didn't take your car, but I know who did." There was a long pause. Then Daniel answered, "Where are you?" Marcus gave the location. "Get the police, get whoever you want, just get here fast." He ended the call and stepped out of the darkness, his heart pounding. But what he didn't expect was what happened next. Daniel didn't bring the police. He brought something much worse. A sleek black Escalade pulled up beside the dock, tires crunching on gravel like bones. Marcus tensed. He'd expected flashing red and blue lights, police tape, justice. Instead, the door opened and Daniel Prescott stepped out in a steel grey suit, flanked by two large men in black. Private security, no badges in sight. Marcus instinctively stepped back, holding up his hands. "I'm here to help," he said carefully. "The car's right there. You've been tricked." But Daniel wasn't looking at the car. He was looking at them. "You know what I see when I look at you?" Daniel said, his voice soft but sharp as broken glass. "An opportunity. You've made this so easy for us, Marcus." One of the guards moved quickly, too quickly. Before Marcus could react, a fist slammed into his jaw. The world spun. He collapsed to the ground. As he came and went, he heard Daniel speaking, calm, calculating. "Myth nights," he said. "I drove drunk, hit a man, killed him. Victoria cleaned up the mess. We hid the car. I needed it gone, forever. Then you showed up, wide-eyed and poor, drooling over it like a mongrel in a butcher's shop. The perfect scapegoat." Marcus tried to speak, but a boot pressed into his chest, silencing him. "Well, you'll have to take it all," Daniel continued, hunching over. "And the best part, no one suspects it. A janitor, touching something that wasn't his. You disappeared, the car sank, and I was free." They dragged Marcus into the super. Inside, once a dream, now a tomb. They locked the door from the outside, and then slowly backed the car up to the edge of the dock. Marcus held his breath. His mind raced. Clara, the baby. This couldn't be the end. The car rolled forward, inch by inch. The water shimmered ahead like a tomb. Suddenly, a memory. The mechanics. He'd studied the emergency order late one night, tucked into a dusty manual while he waited for the floor to dry. He kicked open the fuse panel beneath the dash. His fingers moved quickly, searching, praying. A soft hiss. The automatic lock disengaged. With all his strength, Marcus pushed the door open, rolling out just as the front wheels plunged into the sea. He hit the ground hard, but he was still alive. Daniel screamed somewhere behind him. Footsteps thundered, but Marcus didn't run. He grabbed the dashcam. It had recorded the entire time. That night, a flash drive changed everything. At the municipal courthouse, Marcus walked into the evidence room alone. No lawyers, no press, just a man determined to be heard. He handed the drive to the clerk, then whispered, "Play it." Moments later, a gasp echoed through the room as Daniel's voice came over the speaker, his confession, his cruelty, his plan. The system Daniel had once controlled was now turned against him. By dawn, an arrest warrant had been issued, and for the first time in weeks, Marcus stood outside the courthouse, not a fugitive, not a gatekeeper, but a man who had stared power in the face and lived to speak the truth. Clara waved across the street, her hands on her stomach, her eyes teary and proud. He walked slowly toward her, the weight of injustice still heavy on his shoulders, but lighter now, because for the first time in a long time, someone was finally listening. Marcus stood at the courthouse steps, the early morning sun casting long shadows behind him. Reporters had already begun to gather, microphones aimed like weapons, but he didn't speak, not yet, not until the truth ran its full course. Inside the courtroom, Daniel Prescott and Victoria Langley sat in silence. Gone were the designer suits and expensive smiles. They wore orange now, stripped of status, stripped of lies. The evidence was undeniable. The dashcam footage showed everything. Daniel's confession, Victoria's cover-up, their plot to pin it all on a working man whose only crime was admiration. Marcus didn't watch with vengeance in his heart. Instead, he sat with Clara beside him, her hand resting gently over his, her belly round beneath a soft maternity sweater. When the verdict came guilty on all counts, the courtroom didn't erupt in cheers. It was quiet, reverent, like something sacred had been returned. And for the first time, Marcus looked at the judge, the jury, and the people in that room, and didn't see doubt in their eyes. Peace of respect, Later that week, a local news anchor, grey-haired, steady-voiced, interviewed Marcus for a Sunday special called Unsung Americans. The interviewer asked gently, "What kept you going even when the world turned against you?" Marcus paused. His voice was calm, warm like slow-burning coal. "I didn't want revenge, I just wanted to live with dignity," he said. "People like me, we get overlooked, judged on sight, labeled. But the truth, it don't stay buried forever. It finds a way." And the camera lingered on his face as he added, "And sometimes justice comes not in thunder, but in quiet, steady steps." That message resonated, not just across the city, not just among those who had followed the headlines, but in homes across the country, especially among older Americans who'd lived long enough to know that justice often came slow and truth was a stubborn thing. Letters began to pour in from retired teachers, war veterans, grandmothers. They wrote about how Marcus reminded them of a brother, a student, a friend, someone who had been wronged by a system but never gave up. Clara read the letters aloud to Marcus at night. Some made them laugh, some made them cry, but all of them proved one thing: his story mattered. And when their baby girl, Naomi, was born 3 weeks later, Marcus held her close and whispered, "You were born into a world where your daddy stood up for what's right, and that's the world I'll keep fighting for." The media storm eventually passed, the headlines faded, but in the community, Marcus became more than the janitor, who became a mentor. He started teaching car repair workshops at the local youth center, not just about engines and oil, but about integrity, courage, and second chances. He always ended each class with the same words: "Never let anyone tell you where you belong. You decide that, with your actions, with your heart." And in that quiet shop, with a scent of motor oil mixed with hope, Marcus Call helped rebuild more than just cars. He helped rebuild belief, in fairness, in resilience, in the idea that even when the powerful try to bury the truth, a good man will rise, every single time. The day Naomi was born, the hospital room smelled of antiseptic, warm linen, and hope. Clara's hand squeezed Marcus's as she contracted, but her eyes never wavered. She had trusted him through the darkest times of his life, and now, as their daughter cried for the first time, that trust had come to fruition. They named her Naomi Grace. A week later, Marcus held her in his arms on the small balcony of their new apartment, a modest place filled with peace. The city skyline shimmered in the darkness, but his focus was on Naomi's tiny fingers, curled around his thumb. He had never felt more complete. But peace, like the morning dew, was fragile. 2 weeks after the trial, a thick envelope arrived at their door. There was no return address. Inside was a blurry photo. Marcus, unconscious, trapped inside the Super as it swayed on the edge of the dock. And underneath was a message typed in block letters. "You think it's over?" Clara paled as Marcus read it aloud. "There's someone else out there," she whispered. Marcus didn't want to believe it. Daniel and Victoria were behind bars. The footage had cleared him. The media had praised him. But something about the photo, the angle, the timing, suggested there was another player, someone they'd missed. They'd called the police, the cops had taken pictures, taken notes, promised to follow up. But days passed. Nothing. And then the second letter arrived. This time it was more direct. "You take what's not yours, it's time to pay." There was a bullet taped to it. Clara begged Marcus to leave town, just for a while. "Go stay with my aunt in Ohio," she pleaded. "Take Naomi, just until we find out who this person is." But Marcus shook his head. "I ran once. I won't run again." That night, as he rocked Naomi to sleep, he realized only one person hadn't been arrested. A name that hadn't made the news. The third person who'd loaded the car into the container with Victoria. The dock worker. The man in the shadows. Marcus returned to the docks at dawn, parking a few blocks away. He waited, as he had for weeks, in silence. Hours passed. Then he saw him. Muscular, bearded, the same faint tattoos peeking out from his collar. Marcus followed him to a nearby warehouse. It looked abandoned, but the dim light from a cracked window told a different story. He climbed the back stairs quietly. Inside, voices were heard. He thought he was safe. He thought he couldn't be touched again. Another voice answered, a woman's voice, unfamiliar. "We were promised to share. All we did was move the car. He threw us to the wolves. Now the gatekeeper is famous, and we're forgotten." Marcus's blood ran cold. Yet there were more. It wasn't just Daniel and Victoria. There was a network, people who helped bury the crime and now wanted revenge for being left behind. He pulled out his phone to record, but a floorboard creaked. Silence. Then a scream. He ran, stomping down the rusty stairs, his heart pounding. A shadow came from beside him. Marcus ducked, barely avoiding a swing of the pipe. He turned and ran, zigzagging through the alleys, his breath coming in gasps. He got back into his car, hands shaking, and drove straight for the cop who'd taken the letter. But something was wrong. The cop looked him up and down, then sneered. "You again?" he said. "Don't you know how to let go of a story when the camera's off?" Marcus stared. That's when he saw it. On the cop's wrist, the same tattoo he'd seen on the dock worker. Marcus stiffened. This is deeper than he thought. He stepped back, muttered a thank you and left. But he knew now this wasn't over. Far from it. Back at home, Clara held Naomi, rocking her gently, singing softly. Marcus walked in, sat down slowly, and said, "There are still people who want to hurt us." Clara looks at him, tired but undaunted. "Then we don't fight them alone." That night, Marcus contacted an old friend, James Lattimore, a retired journalist who had covered government corruption. Together they mapped out the web of names, payments, and movements. They found offshore accounts, falsified shipping records, and most importantly, evidence that some law enforcement officers had been paid to cover their tracks. The next morning, Marcus didn't just go public. He went live. From his phone, he streamed everything. His story, the threats, the recordings from the warehouse, the tattoos. He named names. He held up Naomi's baby sock and said this is what they wanted to leave fatherless. The video went viral. By nightfall, federal agents moved in, not just to arrest the dock worker, but also to raid the local precinct. Over a dozen arrests were made. This time, the system didn't fail him. Marcus, he tucked Naomi in that night, knowing something precious had been restored. Not just safety, but truth. For Marcus Cole, truth was never just about proving innocence. It was about restoring humanity. His and others like him who had been silenced too long. In the weeks following the arrests, things changed in subtle, powerful ways. Not just in headlines, but in everyday life. Neighbors who once averted their gaze now waved. The young men at the auto shop, once too nervous to speak, now asked him questions about spark plugs, alignment, and justice. People started seeing Marcus not as the man who mopped the floor, but as the man who stood up. A local school invited him to speak at their graduation. The room quieted as he stepped up to the microphone. He held Naomi in his arms. "I used to think a good life meant staying out of trouble," he began, his voice steady. "But I've learned sometimes trouble finds you anyway. The question is, will you let it break you, or will you rise?" There were tears in the crowd, applause that grew like thunder, because Marcus wasn't just speaking for himself anymore. He was speaking for every soul who'd ever been judged before being known. For every person told they didn't belong because of the color of their skin, the work they did, or the silence they were expected to keep. Clara watched from the front row, her hand on her heart, eyes full of quiet pride. Naomi cooed, unaware that she was already part of a story bigger than herself. And as the world slowly moved on, Marcus didn't chase attention. He planted roots. He started a foundation, the Grace Fund, named after Naomi, to help low-income workers get legal aid and education in trades. He taught evening classes, still wore his shop boots, still drove the old Malibu. And whenever someone asked, "How did you get through it?" he'd smile and answer, "Because I had something to protect and someone who believed in me." So if you made it this far, let me ask you something from the heart. What would you do to protect what's right? Would you stand even when it's hard? Would you speak even when your voice shakes? Because sometimes one person's courage can expose a system. Sometimes it takes a quiet man with a strong back and a gentle heart to remind us that truth doesn't need permission to rise. Tell us in the comments, has someone ever stood up for you when no one else would? We'd love to hear your story. And if Marcus's journey moved you, inspired you, or made you believe again in the power of standing tall even when the odds are stacked against you, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. It helps us keep telling stories that matter, stories that honor the quiet heroes among us. From all of us here, Thank you for watching. Stay strong, stay kind, and never stop believing in truth.